As we turn the page to 2024, I felt we should once more look back at the 2023 year for the Orioles. It was a special one on the field and for this podcast as well. So we'll look back on the entire year coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast.
You are Locked On Orioles, your daily Baltimore Orioles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Orioles fans, today is Monday, January 1st, 2024, and a happy new year to you all out there. This is the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, and as always, I am your host, Connor Newcomb. Now, we are going to recap 2023 here on today's episode. I know we have turned the page. Hope everyone had a great New Year's into 2024. But we never really put a bow on 2023. The incredible season that it was for the Orioles, the disappointing end, being swept by the Rangers in the ALDS, but all the records they set and all the excitement they gave us heading into the 2024 season, which now we can say it as we're into January. The Orioles report to spring training next month. You can now say that. It's getting closer and closer. Now, this offseason is not close to done, but wanted to go back and look at 2023. And I was able to send out a fan survey. If you filled it out, thank you so much. If you have not, this survey is still available in the description of this episode. It is on our Twitter account at Locked On Orioles as well. And you can go check it out. Just click the link, fill it out, ask you some questions about the Orioles on the field, and you're able to give some anonymous thoughts on the podcast as well. So please, 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 even though we're using the data from that survey mostly on today's episode, still fill that out. I really do want to hear your feedback about the show from the last year. Now, before we get into this 2023 review, if you are watching on YouTube, and if you are, thank you so much. If you're not, we are on YouTube as well. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to the Locked On Orioles YouTube page here in 2024. You may see behind me that there's basically a white wall here. Yeah, I've got one little Orioles thing back there just to show you that this is still an Orioles podcast. But no, I have not been taken hostage. No, I am not, in a small little room here. I am moving this week, so bear with me. We will still get 3 episodes out to you this week. We will still get 3 episodes out to you next week and throughout the offseason until the Orioles get back to Sarasota. But I am moving now. I am staying in Baltimore, but moving to a new place. So a lot of things are packed up because we are literally moving later this week. And that means all the Orioles stuff that's usually behind me when I record, that is in a box over to my left right now. So when I move, the space will look a little different. The background will probably look a little different in the coming weeks when get everything set up there. But if you are a viewer on YouTube, just bear with me. There's going to be some white walls behind me for a few episodes here as we go through that move here in 2024. But I wanted to jump into 2023 here. And I sent out a survey to let the fans, not only of just the podcast, but the Orioles in general. I got hundreds of responses. Thank you so much for everyone who filled out that survey. And again, the link is in the description of the episode if you would still like to contribute, and just asked a few things about the Orioles and wanted to run through those kind of Orioles awards, Orioles thoughts, fan survey, your 2023 Orioles Wrapped, if you want to call it. And I'll give you my opinion on some of these questions, and we'll talk about the O's a little bit in 2023. But I wanted to start with the fans' choice for the Orioles MVP. And it was pretty clear from the fans. The AL Rookie of the Year, Gunnar Henderson, got 58% of your votes for Orioles MVP. Actually, only 4 other players. There were a lot of people that voted here. Only 4 other players got votes. Adley Rutschman got 19%. Felix Bautista got 14%. Kyle Bradish got 9%. And Anthony Santander got 1 single vote, at least so far up to this point as I'm recording here on Monday afternoon. I think Gunnar Henderson is the right choice, and I agree. And I talked about that at the end of the season. Just, with the struggles he had the first 6 weeks of the year and then turning it on, winning the Rookie of the Year, propelling this offense, whether he was hitting first, second, third, fourth, fifth, he did it all in this Orioles order. He was a staple. He was the best performer in the playoff series in the ALDS against the Rangers as well. There weren't many good performers for the Orioles in that series, but Gunnar Henderson was one of them in his first playoff games. He just continued to show things more and more that we didn't even think Gunnar had in the bag. I mean, the defense was spectacular at both shortstop and third base for Henderson. He got better and better at hitting lefties as the season went on, which was one thing that he struggled with overall this year. And I think it could be even a better season in 2024, but certainly the correct choice, and I agree with the fans on that one. I put a funny one in here that says, which 2023 Oriole would you most like to be friends with? And The overwhelming majority said Adley Rutschman, or at least majority among the respondents. Adley Rutschman got 29% of the vote. He was the leader. Gunnar Henderson next at 12%, and then Anthony Santander and Ryan Mountcastle each had 5% of the vote. Those were the four guys who really got a significant amount of votes. There were players spread across the board. I think for me, maybe a little off the wall here, Danny Coulombe, just the stories of kind of his antics in the bullpen, his relationship with Fuji, his relationship with his family, just seems like a really good guy, a funny guy to hang out with, and was a critical new Oriole in 2023. I'll take Danny Coulombe. Biggest, most pleasant surprise of Orioles in 2023. Really, there were two big-time answers to this question, and I thought it could go one of two ways. It went the way of Ryan O'Hearn. You all, 32% of you voted Ryan O'Hearn as the biggest pleasant surprise for the Orioles in 2023. Number two, unsurprisingly, was Yennier Cano, although he was all the way down at 18%. And then Kyle Bradish at 15% was third as well. Bradish a little different, where we knew he was already good, but he became great. Whereas O'Hearn and Cano, we didn't expect anything from them, and both of them were incredibly important Orioles in 2023. I thought Cano would be closer just because he was an all-star, kind of went from nothing to an all-star, but I would actually have to agree with it being Ryan O'Hearn. At the very least for Yennier Cano, he had been in the O's system, right? He came over in the Jorge Lopez trade from the Twins at the deadline in 2022, and although it wasn't good in the big leagues with Minnesota and Baltimore in 2022, it was still solid in AAA, and you could see the stuff was there. Like, that is why the O's made the move. And now it's still crazy surprising how good he was, but you could see it that the O's were going to make some tweaks there. With Ryan O'Hearn, I mean, it was 5 years in the big leagues with the Kansas City Royals. One of the worst teams in baseball DFA'd him last offseason because they just couldn't figure it out. The Orioles pick him up to be basically a backup, and he becomes one of their most important hitters this year. That I did not see coming and was certainly a pleasant surprise. Biggest Orioles disappointment in terms of players in 2023. This one was fairly split. There were some different names on there, but Jorge Mateo took the number one spot with 15% of the votes. That'll tell you these answers were very, very spread out. Mateo with 15%. Cedric Mullins came in second at 11%, and then Jack Flaherty at 9% was third in the voting. I didn't put Flaherty for my answer just because, although it was bad, he was only a trade deadline acquisition, so he was only with the Orioles for 2 months. Like, he's there less than half of the season, so it's not like he had a lot of expectations, and he wasn't setting the world on fire the first 4 months of the year with the Cardinals before the trade. I don't think anyone expected Jack Flaherty to be the ace of this team. Was he disappointing? Of course he was, but I actually went with Cedric Mullins as my pick here. Now, yes, Jorge Mateo was bad, and I talked about it couple weeks ago, broke down the situation, if it was between Jorge Mateo and Ramon Arias, like who would you take on the team next year, broke down their 2023 seasons and talked about how from May 1st on, statistically, Jorge Mateo was the worst hitter in Major League Baseball from May 1st on. That's pretty bad. But I think some of the disappointment there comes from how good Mateo was in April. If you remember, he was one of the best players in the league in the month of April for the Orioles. I put Mullins at number one, and it stinks because he had 2 injuries, and a lot of this is injury riddled. But even when he was playing between and after those injuries, he wasn't very good. Talked about it last week. Make sure and go check out the last episode that we posted breaking down Cedric Mullins' season, where Cedric was on a pace close to his 2021 season before he sustained that groin injury at the end of May. And after that, he was just not a good hitter at all, despite coming back and getting injured again, and then seemingly being healthy down the stretch for the final 6 weeks of the year. Just was not producing. And the Orioles definitely could have used that production. Now, certainly Aaron Hicks stepped in and was a huge savior when Mullins was out, but still, yeah, you need more from Mullins, and hopefully he will bounce back next year. Also did a question with which Orioles top prospect are you most excited for? Basically put the Orioles top 12 prospects right now as an option, and unsurprisingly, number one in this vote with 61% of the vote is Jackson Holliday, which is also my answer as well. Now, I'm very excited about a lot of the other prospects in the system too, but Jackson Holliday is the number one prospect in baseball. Barring injury, he is going to be in the big leagues with the Orioles in 2024, and hopefully, although I don't think they're going to do it, but hopefully on the opening day roster for the O's, helping them from day one this season. He's going to be a special, special talent. I cannot wait to see that swing, that approach in the big leagues. But others beyond him, Kobe Mayo got 13%, Heston Kjerstad 12%, and Samuel Basallo 5% of the vote for the next 3 guys. Obviously, all of them could make a big impact, and Kjerstad should be in the big leagues this year. Mayo could be, and Basallo probably not, but look towards 2025 where he could be an impact bat for the Orioles. But those were kind of the player-led questions that I asked about. I also wanted to know about your favorite moments of 2023. You know, times when you realized this team would be special. Times when you sat back and thought that was an amazing moment, and specific games that had you thinking, this is an incredible year for the Orioles. Going to run through some of those answers, some of my answers to the questions coming up after this. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is brought to you by FanDuel. So in the NFL season, we are down to week 18. We are there. And how about the Ravens? An incredible blowout win over the Dolphins over the weekend, locking up the number one seed, and they can rest guys in week 18. But with the NFL season wrapping up, there's still time to get in on the action with FanDuel, America's number one sportsbook. Because right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $150 in bonus bets, win or lose. The app is so easy to use, and there are so many different ways to bet, like live, same-game parlays. You can find bets in the new Explore tab. You can make a parlay in the Parlay Hub, the best way to find popular parlays, and you can do so much more. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet a layup. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. So we are taking a look back here at 2023 for both the Baltimore Orioles on the field and this Locked On Orioles podcast as well. It's like a little bit about the pod at the end of the show. Again, thank you so much to everyone who filled out our end of 2023 fan survey. Again, using a lot of the data from it here on today's episode, but I would still love, if you're listening, if you're watching, if you haven't filled out the survey already, I would still love if you would do so. The survey link is right down in the bio, in the description of this episode on both audio and on YouTube. So just go ahead and click on that, fill it out. There's a chance for you to give your thoughts on the podcast, positive, negatives, whatever it may be. I would very, very much appreciate your feedback. So still go ahead and fill out that survey if you have not already. But a few more questions I had on the survey for the Orioles on the field for you, the fans. And the next one was your favorite game of the season. Now, I left this as an open-ended question. I didn't want to put multiple choice. Even if I went 10, 15 top games, I wanted to give everyone a chance to look back through 162 games. And I would figure it's mostly capped at 101 games. Those were the number that the Orioles won this year, but it could be any game, and let you fill it out yourself. So because of that, it became a little harder to pull together the full data. And I didn't want to run through hundreds of responses one by one. I'll be candid with you there to get an exact percentage of who put what. But in terms of just reading through and seeing which ones came up the most, here are some of the most popular ones for your favorite games this year. Obviously, Clinchmas, September 28th, the Orioles beating the Red Sox to clinch the division. That was a big one. We'll get to that in a second as well. The Cedric Mullins game in Seattle on that Sunday when he robbed the homer in the ninth inning to keep the Orioles in the lead in the bottom of the ninth. Seattle tied it. Then Mullins hits the go-ahead two-run homer in the top of the 10th to win the game. Just an incredible performance. The playoff clincher with the Tampa Bay Rays in mid-September, that Sunday wild game, the Orioles walking it off in 11 innings to clinch a playoff berth and keep themselves 2 games ahead of the Rays in the AL East. Personally, that was my favorite game of the season. Just the twists and turns of that thing. You know, the Orioles had come back. They had won the Saturday night game after dropping the first 2 in that series. Remember, the Rays had tied the division after winning games 1 and 2 at Camden Yards of that series. O's come back. Grayson Rodriguez dominates. The bats explode. They win 8-0 on Saturday night. They go back up by a game, but they're still in a huge spot because even though they had the tiebreaker at that point, if they win that Sunday game, they go into the final 2 weeks of the season with a 2-game lead. If they lose, they go in with the division tied. And that would have made things very, very different down the stretch. And the Rays hit those back-to-back homers in the 8th inning and take a 3-1 lead. And you're just like, this thing is over. The Orioles are down to their final strike. Pete Fairbanks is on the mound. And Adam Frazier, who, you know, I don't think he was all the Orioles wanted him to be on that 1-year free agent contract. But that swing that he had in the bottom of the 9th inning, 2 strikes and 2 outs in that playoff clinching game on September 17th against the Rays was basically worth the entire $8 million that the Orioles gave him, slapping a double down the third baseline. Jorge Mateo scores from first to tie the game at 3, send it to extras. We had some wild stuff in extra innings where Adley Rutschman had to fight off a pitch with 2 outs to tie the game in the 10th. And then DL Hall puts up a huge 0 in the 11th. And Cedric Mullins, after Ryan O'Hearn, the first sack bunt of his career, gets the winning run to third with one out. Cedric Mullins puts the game away, walks it off with a sac fly, and the O's clinch the playoffs and stay 2 games up. That was just an incredible game. My emotions were probably at their highest on that Adam Frazier double in the 9th inning, going crazy in the apartment here. And yeah, that's going to be my favorite game of the season. But other ones that were put on there, the 14-1 shellacking the Orioles put on the Yankees in New York earlier in the season when Gunnar Henderson was 4 for 4 through the first 4 innings. That was a fun one. The Sunday night baseball game in late July against the Yankees was also a good one. Remember, the O's put up a 7 spot in the first inning against Luis Severino, went on to win that game 9-3 and win that series and the season series against New York. Saw the Ryan O'Hearn homer game, really the Ryan O'Hearn coming out party in Toronto when he hit that game-tying 3-run homer in the 8th off of Jordan Romano up in Toronto in that huge series where the Orioles swept the Jays. And also saw a lot of the Anthony Santander walk-off homer, that same Yankees series in late July. It was a pitching display. Garrett Cole versus Grayson Rodriguez, 0-0 game, and Santander walks it off with a homer in the bottom of the 9th. Saw a lot of other great games in there as well, but those are the ones that really stood out, and I saw a lot from the respondents. Also asked for your favorite moment of the season, right? And a lot of people put a game, but there's also different things. You know, a game encapsulates a lot. A moment is one time where you're just going to look back at the 2023 Orioles and really remember it. Like, that was the moment. A lot of it was clinchmas, and I have to agree that is it for me. I was in the ballpark for the Orioles clinching the division on September 28th against the Red Sox. Just the moment that the ground out to third, Tyler Wells gets that final out to secure the win. The players pour out of the field. The confetti comes down. It's a full ballpark. It just felt like, all right, winning baseball was really, really back in Baltimore. Shout out to my guy Chris, who I was at that game with as well. But that was a really, really special moment that I'll remember. Other ones had some good ones. A lot of people said the Jordan Westburg debut. Do you remember that game? It was at home against the Reds. Jordan Westburg's debut, rainy game, multiple rain delays. Orioles actually won the game, but by the end of it, there were so many rain delays. It was like midnight. The Orioles were up like 10-2. And all of Jordan Westburg's friends and family had made their way down to right behind home plate, and they're chanting for him, and they're going crazy, and he gets his first big league hit in that game, and they go wild. That was definitely a special moment. A lot of people put the Frazier double, the playoff clinching moment against the Rays, a big one as well. A couple of people just said the playoff atmosphere at Camden Yards, right? Despite the Orioles losing both of those home playoff games in the ALDS against the Rangers, and I was there for both of those games, that scene was incredible, right? Especially, I mean, the number one scene was in game 2 when Aaron Hicks punches the 2-run single through the hole to put the Orioles up and, you know, brings home 2 with the bases loaded. And the Orioles, the crowd finally getting to explode after just never getting to quite explode in that close game 1 loss to really do it in the first inning of game 2. Obviously, the rest of the game did not go their way at all, but that was just an amazing moment. That atmosphere, seeing the yard packed again like that for playoff baseball for the first time in 9 years was truly perfect. A lot of people said overtaking the Rays in the middle of the season to take first place. And we had a couple people say the Gunnar no cycle moment. I don't know if you remember that from Oakland, but Gunnar was a single away from the cycle, and he hit one into the gap, and he busted it for 2 and got himself a double instead. So he actually ended up with a better game because he had a double instead of a single, but did not get the cycle. Just a lot of really cool moments from the Orioles season. Then the last one I was really, really interested in, I asked, what was the moment that you knew that the 2023 Orioles were special? And a lot of people said, oh, in spring training, you know, opening day. Okay. All right. The earliest one I'll accept is people saying the Orioles not falling apart after the Ryan McKenna dropped fly ball in game 2 of the season at Fenway Park. Yes, they did lose the game and lose the next day to lose the series, but they rallied themselves back and didn't let them get into a slump. I'll accept that one. Other good ones, Adley Rutschman, 5 for 5 on opening day. It's a little early to say they're special, but I get it. That was a cool moment. The 8-run comeback against Nestor Cortez and the Yankees in New York. That was a very, very fun game. Adam Frazier going deep off Cortez. They just kept scoring in the 7th inning of that game. I think it was an 8-run 7th that they had. Other big ones, Gunnar Henderson figuring it out. They said really that was in mid-May when he just started to hit. And I think a lot of people put the big home run against the Royals, the Utah Street record 462-foot blast from Gunnar Henderson in that Sunday game against Kansas City really said, all right, I'm back. Taking 3 of 4 in Tampa in July for the O's to take over first place. That series was incredible. You had that amazing Ramon Arias play in that Thursday night game to win it. And then you had the heroics from Ryan O'Hearn in the Saturday game. And then you had Felix Bautista in the Sunday game. That was just an incredible series. That was a good one. For me, and this was probably the number one answer I saw, it was close. I didn't do full statistics. It was probably pretty close what was number one, but this might have been, was that Braves series. And I continue to say this throughout the season, that Braves series in May was the series that showed me this O's team is for real. And yes, the Orioles lost that series, right? They broke things open in game one, Friday night. Santander hits a grand slam late. They blow out the Braves. And then they lose on Saturday on national TV. They have the lead in the eighth. Danny Coulomb gives up a 2-run homer in the eighth to Kevin Pillar that flips the game on its head. Of course, it's Kevin Pillar. And then the Sunday game goes to extra innings, and the Orioles just aren't able to hold on. And I believe 11 innings in that game. And they lost the series, right? They dropped 2 out of 3. But it was against the Atlanta Braves, right? Has been arguably the best team in baseball for the past 3 years or so. And you just felt like the O's were in every game. They had a serious chance to sweep that series and almost did. And I had a lot of Braves fans in the YouTube comments in that Monday episode after that series, recapping the series, just saying like, hey, this O's team is for real. This is amazing. Hope to see you in the World Series. Obviously, it didn't work out in the postseason for either the Braves or the Orioles. But that was a moment, and a lot of people said this, that really showed that like this O's team is for real and compete with anyone. And all of a sudden, they win 101 games and win the AL East. And what a season it was. Yes, the playoffs didn't go well. You want to do at least win a playoff game? That would have been nice. They get swept out in the ALDS. Makes you feel a little better that Rangers team went on to win the World Series, but still did not feel good. But the regular season is a lot longer than the postseason, and it tells you a lot more about your team. And that regular season was special. I went to 20 games this year, which was my most ever. I believe I ended up, if you count the postseason, I believe I ended up 10-10, which isn't great. It might have been 11-9. It was maybe 500, maybe a tick above. Otherwise, wasn't great. I think my record was 10-10 in those 20 games that I went to, but it was still amazing to get to go to the games throughout this season and see such a special year for the Orioles. And you know, hopefully it just gets better and better, and there's more playoff success as well as we move forward, but continue to savor this season, this 2023 year. Like, despite it not going well in the postseason, that regular season was just so special. And it's something you should hold on to for years to come. But it was also a special year for me, right? This podcast took off in 2023. And I gave you all a chance in this survey to give your thoughts on the podcast. Talk about that a little bit. Talk about the year that was in the pod, just to finish things off here, to kick off our first episode of 2024. So to finish off episode number 1 of 2024, just wanted to read through a few stats from the Locked On Orioles podcast in 2023. First of all, we reached 900 episodes. Now, not in the year. That would have been crazy. But 900 episodes overall. I believe right now is episode 907 since I've taken over this podcast. I took over, I believe, the last week of January in 2020. What a time to take over a podcast. About a month away from everything in sports shutting down. I was recording throughout the pandemic before that 2020 season finally started in July. Orioles weren't good. Orioles were horrendous in 2021, suffered through that season, not a lot of listenership. Then in 2022, things start to turn. People start to find the pod, was having a lot more fun. And then this year was really the year. We had over 763,000 downloads to the podcast this year, which was more than double the amount of downloads we had in 2022. Number 1 episode was the episode right after Clinchmas, after the Orioles clinched the AL East. Our September 29th episode, breaking that down, was number 1. And number 2 was the episode I did after the Orioles had suspended Kevin Brown, or at least after we found out that the Orioles had suspended Kevin Brown for basically doing nothing. And I kind of went in on John Angelos, as I'm known to do, but this one was above all the rest. Kind of spilled some tea on John Angelos, Masson, and the Orioles and all of it. That was our number 2 most downloaded episode, so that was worth it as well. On YouTube, almost 500,000 views on YouTube. Added 3,700 subscribers on YouTube this year to get to about 5,300, just above 5,300 subscribers on YouTube. Make sure to continue to like, comment, and subscribe here to the Locked On Orioles YouTube page. But thank you all for that. Number 1 episode was after Shohei pitched and hit a long homer against Grayson Rodriguez against the Angels. This is what we call the Shohei bump in the YouTube game, where you put Shohei Ohtani in the title, you talk about Shohei Ohtani, and you get a large bump in views. But the Orioles-centric ones, that same Kevin Brown suspension episode was number 2. And after the Jack Flaherty trade, that was my 3rd most viewed episode on YouTube. We thought that would really propel the Orioles down the stretch. Obviously, it did not. But YouTube views were up 365% from 2022. I'm told that's pretty good. Over 6 million impressions on the YouTube page in the year 2023. And that is all thanks to you all, right? I think everyone from the everydayers out there, right? And I asked this in the survey, how often do you listen or watch the show? Almost 50% of the people that filled out this survey, and hundreds of respondents, said every day or almost every day I listen or watch. I cannot thank you all enough for how you have helped to propel this podcast and this show forward. I can't think it's incredible. Like it's not the biggest podcast in the world by any means at all, but this following and meeting you all, whether at games, on the internet, in the YouTube comments, whatever it may be, it has been a really, really fun ride. And I thank you all, even if you're someone who I listen, 3 to 4 times a week, 1 to 2 times a week, maybe I listen here and there, whatever it may be. I thank you so much for your support of the podcast. Just really cool to see where it's gone. And listen, I have talked about this, I believe, a couple of times on the show, but I do work a 9-to-5 job outside of this. I used to be a full-time freelance sports broadcaster, and I still do some of that stuff, but I have a separate 9-to-5 job, and I started that in September of 2022. And so this year, 2023, was my first in-season time hosting the podcast and having that job. And it made it difficult, right? Doing this podcast every day, 5 days a week throughout the season was much more difficult in 2023. But some of it was the Orioles being so successful, and a lot of it was you all, the listeners, subscribers, who kept me doing it. Like, I kind of told myself early in the year that if this O's team is really not special, right? Something awesome doesn't happen and they don't take another step forward. I was truly heavily considering giving up the podcast after 2023. Of course, there was a lot of growth in the team and with the show, and that's all thanks to you all. And it's tough sometimes with my schedule, but I am here for the long run. And that is truly thanks to you all for all of your support with this show. And then I just wanted to finish up with some of the suggestions that were given. I gave a spot on the survey. Hey, what's your favorite part of the podcast? And then what is, something that needs to improve or something that you think should be added to the podcast? And I got some amazing feedback from all of you. Thank you so much. Like, this is what I want to do. This show is for you all, right? This isn't the most eccentric podcast. These aren't hour-and-a-half long episodes. This is different. I think what sets this apart is the format is different. And a lot of you talked about this as well. It's 5 days a week. It's there pretty much every morning when you're ready to go to work or ready to listen to a podcast or whatever it may be. And you can hear about the previous night's game and anything going on around the Orioles as well from the day before. There's really nothing like it in the podcast space covering the Orioles. And I think it's just a better version of what you could get if you turned on local sports radio the morning after an Orioles game. So that's what I think has been great for this show. But a lot of suggestions were amazing. And a lot of them I'm going to take into account. And there will be some changes in 2024. So I kind of wanted to start there because a couple of suggestions, a lot of people talked about like the audio and video quality of this show, right? It's probably a little lower right now that there's nothing behind me. Don't worry, once the move is done, there'll be a background behind me again. It's something I've been working on a lot, trying to get, better mic, better video equipment right now. Like, we're moving in that direction. I do think you'll start to see an improvement once I physically move to the new place and get that set up all done. There's going to be some improvements there. So certainly working on that. I appreciate that feedback as well. Get a lot of feedback about, hey, you're away from the mic, close to the mic. It happens. I think I've mentioned this before, do have a more minor case of Tourette's syndrome. So sometimes I got to move around. I can't help it. Sometimes that goes away from the mic. That one's a tough one to fix. But also, there was some ask for some more live episodes. It's something I started doing kind of at the end of 2023 when the Orioles made some moves, when there was the Craig Kimbrell signing, when there was the news about David Rubenstein being interested in buying the team, when the lease was signed. I did some live episodes, did some live mailbags, Q&As. A lot of people want those. That is in the plans. There's going to be a lot more live episodes here in 2024, so get ready for that. And then there were some other ones that I saw a lot that I just wanted to address just to kind of answer the questions. Hey, why don't you do this? Why can't you do that? Saw a lot about, hey, can you add in more video highlights, right? Or more screen caps from different things, to show more on YouTube. I wish I could, right? I wouldn't want to be just looking at my face talk with, the rundown right over here. But because of rights issues and other things like that, the only thing I can really do is flash photos from time to time. And I've done that a little bit here on this show on YouTube, but generally just because of rights issues and copyright issues, not really able to show highlights from games. I wish I could, but I can't. So that's kind of where we are there. And that's not really going to change. It's going to continue to look like this. Another one was more talk on the minor leagues. I do talk about the minors from time to time on here. I talked about the minors way, way more, back in 2020 and 2021 and 22 when the Orioles weren't nearly as good at the major league level. All of these great players who are on the O's now, they were in the minor league. So I was talking about it a lot more back then. I still get to the system when I can, but I will tell you, listen to Orioles on the Verge. I listen to their podcast. Bob and Nick and Zach do a great job over there covering all things Orioles minor leagues. I think they watch the games, right? I go to some games. I watch a few games. I watch when, somebody really important's maybe on the mound or debuting. I look at the box scores, but I don't watch nearly as much Orioles minor league baseball as those three guys do. And they have a podcast, which I think now comes out twice a week. So go subscribe to them, listen to them. They will give you the minor league stuff. They will come on this pod. I will go on that podcast. I will still talk about the minors, but with the major league team being so good, it's only 30 minutes a day, and there's usually a game to talk about. That's kind of the reason why it's not as much minor league talk anymore. And then the last one I saw a lot, and this might have been the, I guess, not even criticism, but just suggestion I saw the most on the survey was get more guests. Now, as you could probably tell, I've had more guests already in the off season just because it's much easier. I like to do the player season review series with guests most of the time, and I have a good relationship with a lot of the beat writers and the people that cover the Orioles, and it's great to get them on from time to time to talk about the team and the things going on around it. I will pull back the curtain a little bit on the guests. It is almost impossible for me to do guests regularly during the season. I'll get them from time to time when I have time to do it, when there's something that really requires a guest, whatever it may be, I will do it. And I have them on, I'd say maybe once, twice a month, usually throughout the season, maybe a little more I'll have a guest on, but it is really tough. My recording schedule, because I do have a 9-to-5 job, is I go into work. So from the start of the day until 5 p.m. usually, a little bit later sometimes, I am not able to record with any kind of guest at all and get on their schedule. And then generally, because of when I record the podcast, I wait for after the game to end. I record, I upload and edit, and then I go to bed. And so really that recording is between 9:30 and 11:30 there at night. It is really tough to consistently get someone who can be on that same schedule and can come on the show at that specific time. And sometimes I'm able to record, pre-record these interviews and work them around and edit them in. And I do that from time to time when I really need to. But that's a little bit of pulling back the curtain. Like, it's almost impossible for me to regularly have guests. I've thought about, could I have a co-host on this show? Would it make it better? It might, but it would be really tough to find someone else who can be on that exact schedule with me and do the show like that. So it's a little pulling back the curtain. I try to get guests when I can, when I think they're appropriate, but it is really tough. And again, I do what I can with the show. When it's just solo me, but I get, right, hearing a lot of my voice for 30 straight minutes every day, it can get a little monotonous. It does switch it up a little bit, and it is nice to have a guest on here. Just kind of let you know why not as many guests as maybe I would like at times on the show. But otherwise, incredible suggestions, taking a lot of them into account. Thank you for the kind words about the show. Just some amazing feedback in that form. And again, that survey link is still in the description of today's episode. And please go still fill it out. I really do want to hear your feedback about the show as we move into 2024. That'll do it for today. Thank you so much for tuning in. Happy New Year once again. I will be back tomorrow. I will not have moved yet. I will still have this plain white background behind me, but we will then look forward to 2024 really for the first time on this show. Going to give out some New Year's resolutions to some Orioles players, front office members, and others. What do they need to change in 2024 for the Orioles to take that next step? That's coming up on tomorrow's episode. But until then, I'm Connor Newcomb, and this has been the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.